Welcome! In this video, I thought I would show you how you can build an individualized training cycle using my various training plans. It's really easy to do, so let's jump in and I'll show you the few steps you need to take to build your new training cycle. Now, to build your new training cycle, you'll need a couple of resources, and I've linked to those below. The first is I've written a couple of articles on how to sequence my training plans based on different types of goals. And if you head to the McMillanrunning.com website, go to the Running University section, and you'll see these two articles. One is for short distance race goals. You can see that here. And it walks through different common scenarios. So for example, if we have a race season coming up in around 6 months, then here's kind of the sequence you would use. Another scenario might be if you're a track athlete getting ready for indoor and outdoor track. Maybe you're starting over, you've had a long break from running, you're coming back into running, want to get going again. Maybe you're more endurance oriented, but you'd like to have a short distance or speed focus. I provide some of those different scenarios and how you might sequence my training plans to build that training cycle. I also have one here linked that is for long distance plans, so a half marathon or marathon focus. And again, there's different scenarios. Another marathon in 6 months, that's a common scenario. The need for speed, a marathoner wanting to work on speed, maybe a marathoner wanting to drop down and focus on the half marathon, maybe a marathoner who the race didn't go so well in their first marathon, so they want to turn around quickly and run another one. I'll talk to you about how to do that. Race again, so carry that marathon fitness into a few other races. So that is those two articles I encourage you to read, because I'm going to walk through those during this video. And I'm going to use scenario number 1, which is a common scenario that I get questions about, which is you finished a marathon and now your next one is in about 6 months, maybe 4 to 6 months. This would be a scenario like you ran the Chicago Marathon in the fall, and then in the spring you're going to do Boston or London. So we're going to use this plan, this sequence of plans, as we build your training cycle. Now, the other resource that you'll need is my training cycle builder worksheet, and I'll walk you through this as well. Again, there'll be a link to it below the video so you can use this as you begin to build your plan. Now let's go back to that article that I want to focus on, and that is for the long distance race goals. In this case, another marathon in around 6 months. I mentioned kind of the Chicago to Boston or Chicago to London, but again, you can modify this for your particular needs. So we're going to use scenario 1, and what it says is this is the best sequence of my training plans to build you toward that race. You would start with a base training plan, which is up to 8 weeks long. Then add a hill module training plan, which is up to 6 weeks long. If there's time, a speed module training plan, another 6 weeks. And then finally, your marathon training plan, which can go all the way up to 16 weeks. That's what we're going to use in this sample of building the training cycle. Now let's turn our attention back to the worksheet and let me walk you through it. As you can see, this is just a pre-built Excel worksheet that's formatted to make it easy for you to follow these few steps to build your plan. There are a few different columns in the Excel spreadsheet. So the first column is weeks, so how many weeks between when you're starting and to the finish. If you need to add more weeks, you can simply copy these down and it will add a few more weeks into your training cycle. The second column is the date, so we'll start with when you want the training cycle to begin. So for our example athlete, we're going to say that she just ran the Chicago Marathon and now she's ready to begin her recovery plan and then build through those training plans that I mentioned toward a marathon, say Boston or London in the spring. And again, you can simply change the date if you need to, and all the corresponding dates below will change. We're going to keep ours to what we had, and this will run all the way down to 28 or 29 weeks, which is when her next marathon is going to be. And then I've got space for plan number 1, plan number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Obviously, if you wanted to add another plan, you could simply copy this column, insert it, and then you could have plan number 6. And then on the far right hand side, I have notes. So this is really good when you're building a training cycle, so that you put in any races or notes that you'll want to refer back to as you're actually implementing these different training plans. Now, like I said, I usually like to do no more than 6 months of planning this. You can do a full year if you like, but I just find that so much changes in life over a year that it's best to kind of work on kind of a 4 to 6 month training cycle focus. But again, you can modify it as you like. Now, the last thing to do as you begin to use this Excel spreadsheet, I encourage you to go in and save it as whatever that training cycle is going to be. So for example, I would do a file save as, and I might say Susan's London Marathon training cycle. Save that, and that way I can always refer back to it as I go through the process of adding these plans over the course of the next 6 months. Now, as I mentioned, it's very easy. You have your number of weeks in the first column and then your dates. So we're going to say that her race is here at the end of April. Again, you can modify those for your particular situation. Now, as we begin to insert the plans, we'll want to return to our training cycle scenario that I talked about. So we're going to have 4 different plans in scenario number 1. And we're going to have to start with the recovery plan because she just finished the Chicago Marathon, as I mentioned. So let's kind of toggle back and forth between these two, and we'll add in these different plans. So plan number 1 is going to be the marathon recovery plan. Since she just finished the race, we need to do that before we begin with the base plan that you saw before. So I'm just going to label this marathon recovery. And the marathon recovery plan is 4 weeks long. So I'm going to add those full 4 weeks. So that plan is now inserted. Now, obviously, I know how long every plan is. If you don't, you can just go to the training plan library, look at those plans, and you'll see the number of weeks maximum for each of those plans. So we're going to put this as plan number 1 because she needs to have some recovery after that marathon that she just did. Obviously, we wouldn't want to jump straight into the next hard training plan or more focused training plan. Now, if we go back, we see the next plan in the list, which is the first in this scenario, is the base plan, and it's up to 8 weeks long. So I'll return and I'll begin to put in base for that, and I'll add the number of weeks here. Make sure I did that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got 8 weeks of my base plan. That's the second plan that we're going to use in building her training cycle. And then we'll go to plan number 3, which is a hill training plan up to 6 weeks long. So I'll put in hills here, or I'll put in hill plan here. We've got our 6 weeks of our hill plan. Again, return to the article. Next is a speed training plan, another 6 weeks. So I'll put in speed here. Copy that down until we have our full 6 weeks. And then our last plan in the sequence, the recommended sequence, is the marathon training plan. That's up to 16 weeks long. So I'll add this as our 5th plan. So now we have our 16-week marathon plan, our last plan in the training cycle, inserted. So now let's talk about what we actually do to build the cycle, get the sequencing correct. So the first thing is plan number 1 we know is going to start immediately because she just finished a race. Now what I like to do is highlight in green the week that plan is going to start. So I just simply go up and add that as a background color. So she's going to begin her marathon recovery plan. It's up to a 4-week plan that she will start here on the 8th of October. Now, knowing her, because I've coached her for a while, I know that she just needs a couple of weeks of marathon recovery and she's ready to move into the training plan cycle. If she had done a race where she was really tired or beat up or maybe had an injury coming off of the race, then maybe I would adjust what I'm going to show you. But in a normal situation, she needs a couple of weeks of the marathon recovery plan, and then she's feeling fine and ready to move into the next plan. Now, her next plan in the training sequence, and again, let's go back to our training sequence here. That's going to be the base training plans for up to 8 weeks. Now, in our training plan cycle builder, the worksheet, I've got the 8 weeks right here. Now, normally I said she was going to do 2 weeks of the marathon recovery, and then we would start the base plan, and that would be up to 8 weeks long. In her case, because I am kind of thinking of this particular runner that I work with, I know that she's already gone through the base plan a couple of times in previous training cycles, and so we don't need the full 8 weeks of that plan. I actually would like her to do the last 6 weeks of that plan instead of the full 8 weeks. If it was her first time going through this, I'd probably want her to do all 8 weeks. But if you've got a good base built, you have some experience, then it's okay to modify how many weeks you do of a plan. So I'm actually going to move this back up because I want her to do the last 6 weeks of this plan. And again, I'm going to highlight this cell here so that I know this is the date that I want her to start that base plan, and we've got 6 weeks of it. Now let's return to our sequence, and we see we had the base plan up to 8 weeks. I mentioned we're just going to do the last few weeks of the base plan for her, and then we have a hill training plan which is up to 6 weeks long. And so if we go back to our worksheet, we'll take these 6 weeks and we want to move those down so that they begin whenever she's finished with her base plan here. And again, I would highlight that start date in green so it reminds me that's when I want to add that plan to start in her program. Now the next plan in the sequence is the speed plan. Again, up to 6 weeks. That's what I'd like her to do after the hill plan. So I'll just simply move this down and insert it, and then here is where I would want her to begin her speed plan. Now before we go farther, I'm going to put in our marathon week. I'm going to make a note of that so I know this is the last day of the marathon plan, because obviously plan number 5 is the marathon plan itself from the training cycle article. So I'm going to move this down so that it actually lines up with when that end date is, because obviously we need that plan. Unlike the others, we need a hard end date for that plan so it lines up with marathon week. Now that we have all of our plans in and we've kind of shifted them around a little bit, we can begin to really individualize the training cycle for her. As I mentioned, I know that she only needs a couple of weeks of marathon recovery. She's not too beat up coming off of Chicago. So I'm going to begin the base plan in week 3, and I'm going to do the last few weeks of that plan. So I'm not starting at week 1 for her because she's done the plan before. I'm going to start in week 3 for her. Also, this hill plan, I want to move it earlier by a week because I'm going to lose too many weeks of marathon training otherwise. I need to do more marathon training than I have listed right here. So I'm just going to move up the plan, and we're going to take out, she won't do this last week of the base plan. Now the speed plan, again, is going too deep into the marathon plan. I want her to do between 10 and 12 weeks of that full 16-week program. Again, if you stack these preparatory plans, build the sequence the way I mentioned, you just need the last bit of the marathon plan because these first few weeks are just prep anyway for a runner who maybe didn't do this training plan sequence and is not as prepared for the plan. So I'm going to move this speed workout up a little bit so that I get some more weeks of the marathon plan. That looks pretty good to me. Let's see how many marathon weeks we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's perfect. I think that that'll work great for her, and we will start the marathon plan on this date. And again, I can adjust this as I go, but this is the plan that I'm building the sequence, and I can always adjust it based on how she's doing. So now we've got our 5 plans built, starting from right after the marathon she just ran and building all the way to her marathon week in the spring. We're going to do the first couple of weeks of the marathon recovery plan because that's all she'll need. We're going to do the last few weeks of the base plan because she's already done the base plan in the past, and so I know she only needs a few weeks of that. We're going to do the first 4 weeks of the hill plan. That's a great prep for the speed plan. I actually want her to do all 6 weeks of the speed plan because that really, in the past, I've known that's really helped her. She builds a lot more speed going into the marathon plan. She carries that speed into this training cycle. And then we're going to do the last 11 weeks of the marathon plan, ending on her race week, her race marathon week. So it's very simple, as you can see, to build the plan and then slide the start dates around so that you get everything to line up from where you're starting to where you want to end on your race date. Now our next step is to go in and add some notes. What I like to do in the notes is just remind myself of my thinking as I was building this plan. So my first note's going to be only need 2 weeks of marathon recovery. That will go there. Another thing that I'm going to note is here, I'm going to say do last 4 to 5 weeks of base. And then I also know that she always does an 8K, which is her turkey trot, our Thanksgiving traditional racing. So I'm going to put that in here because I know that she's going to want to do that, and I'll need to add that into this base plan into her calendar. Next, I know that she also does a New Year's Day 5K. So I'm going to add this in here as well. That'll remind me that I need to remind her of that plan so we can get that, or that race, so she can get it in her plan. And then she always races a half marathon, and that is going to actually fall on this week. She likes to do a tune-up a few weeks out from her marathon. So those are some good notes that I've added in here, and I can obviously refer back to these once I save it to remind myself of what I was thinking when I built her training cycle. We can make sure these races are added into her actual training calendar and adjust the training around that as we need to. Now that we have all the plans in, we've got our notes, we've thought about the starting date for each of the plans, our final step is to begin to add a plan. We want to start with our first plan and get that added. There's a video on that, or you can just follow the prompts when you're adding your plan. It's pretty easy to do, and that'll get your first plan set up. I caution you, it's really only best to add one plan at a time. So you'd add the recovery plan, and then 2 weeks later you would add the base plan, remove the recovery plan, because when these plans overlap, you would actually have 2 workouts on a day or multiple runs on a day. If you ever see that, you know that you've got 2 plans running at the same time. You'd want to delete the plan you're not using or the one that's coming in the future so you don't get confused that way. So I'd add the first plan, finish the first couple of weeks, then add this base plan, again looking at the end date or the start date so that it lines up correctly. And then the same thing, once I finish the base plan, I would have the hill plan starting on this week, going for a few weeks. Then I would add the speed plan, delete the hill plan, do that for a few weeks, and then add our marathon plan, obviously with the end date of your marathon. And certainly once you begin the process of applying your plan, that's when you can do all the other customization, integrate your McMillan paces, you'll get your prehab routines set up, you can choose your units of measurement if you want kilometers or miles, you can sync your Garmin, sync your Strava account. You can do all these things to really personalize the plan. But what I wanted to do in this video was kind of walk you through this simple process that I've used for a number of years so that you can individualize a training cycle for your next race, taking advantage of all of my training plans that are available in the training plan library. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again real soon.